Trembling violently in her grip, the contract was an unreadable blur to the woman who commanded a $40 billion empire. As the boardroom began to spin and shadows gnawed at her peripheral vision, she fled. Sequestered in the back of a soundproof Maybach, Manhattan's most ruthless titan finally broke down, but the man sitting in the driver's seat refused to let her fall. Minna Kensington was not a woman who believed in weakness. At 42, she was the undisputed CEO of Kensington Cross Enterprises, a global titan in commercial real estate and biomedical tech. She had inherited a failing company from her father and forged it into a $40 billion empire through sheer will, sleepless nights, and a ruthlessness that terrified Wall Street. She lived her life in the glare of the public eye, every outfit scrutinized, every business decision analyzed. But Minna had a secret. A terrifying, consuming secret that was slowly eating away at her reality. It started 3 months ago as a subtle annoyance, a faint gray smudge in the periphery of her left eye. She blamed it on exhaustion, on the endless hours staring at financial models on her tablet. But the smudge didn't fade, it grew. It turned into a web of dark floaters, followed by an agonizing sensitivity to fluorescent lights. Within weeks, the crisp lines of architectural blueprints began to warp and blur. By Tuesday morning of the most critical week of her career, the world had become a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Minna sat in the cavernous penthouse boardroom of the Kensington Cross Tower. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, but to Minna, the Chrysler Building was nothing more than a jagged, silver blur. Beside her, Richard Belmont, a senior board member who had been orchestrating a quiet coup to oust her, was drumming his fingers on the mahogany table. The acquisition of the Apex Biolabs patent requires your signature on Section 4. Minna, Belmont said, his voice dripping with false patience. He slid the thick, leather-bound folder across the table. I assume you've read the updated clauses on liability? Minna stared down. The text was a chaotic swarm of black ants. She blinked hard, trying to force her retinas to focus. Panic, cold and sharp, coiled in her stomach. If she hesitated, Belmont would smell blood. If she admitted she couldn't see the words, the board would trigger the medical competency clause in her contract by Friday. I'm reviewing it, Richard, she said, her voice perfectly level. A masterclass in deception. She reached for her reading glasses, but her depth perception was entirely gone. Her hand knocked against her porcelain coffee cup. It tipped. Before the hot liquid could ruin the document, a large, calloused hand shot out from behind her, righting the cup with impossible speed. Apologies, Miss Kensington. I bumped the table, a low, gravelly voice said. It was Paul. Paul Hayes was a relatively new addition to her executive detail. Officially, he was her lead driver and personal security. Unofficially, he was a ghost. At 38, Paul possessed the quiet, coiled energy of a man who had seen the worst of the world and learned to navigate it silently. He was a former structural engineer whose life had violently derailed 5 years ago when his wife passed away, leaving him with a mountain of debt and a daughter, Lily, who had been born with a severe congenital heart defect. Paul didn't drive a Maybach because he loved cars. He drove it because Kensington Cross offered the most comprehensive gold-tier corporate health insurance in the state of New York, and Lily needed a specialized $2 million artificial valve replacement at Mount Sinai. Paul stepped back, wiping a drop of spilled coffee from the table with a napkin. As he did, he subtly shifted the document. Page 4, paragraph 2, the liability cap is set at $400 million, he murmured, his voice so low that only Minna, leaning back in her chair, could hear the vibration of the words. Minna's breath hitched. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. Instead, she turned to Belmont with a glacial smile. A $400 million liability cap is unacceptable, Richard. The original agreement was strictly capped at $250. I won't sign this until legal revises it. She closed the folder sharply. Meeting adjourned. As the board members filed out, grumbling and exchanging confused glances, Minna remained seated, her hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles turned white. Paul stood quietly by the door. He hadn't missed the signs. He was an engineer. His entire life had been built on observing structural flaws. He had noticed her missing the handle of the car door by an inch for the past 2 weeks. He had noticed the way she covertly dragged her fingertips along the walls of the hallway to guide her steps. He had noticed the font size on her iPad maxed out to proportions that were comical for someone of her age. "You can wait in the car, Paul," she said, her voice echoing in the empty room.